Hey, welcome to I was just thinking, Rudy Maxa. I'm a travel journalist and broadcaster. And if you regularly watch these broadcasts, you know that we talk travel and we talk about it, all kinds of travel. And it occurred to me recently that, oh, by the way, I'm coming, if I'm a little, if my picture isn't as sharp as normal, I'm coming to you from a rural part of the Bordeaux region in France. And the Wi-Fi is not quite as strong as one would want it to be, but here I am. Um, it occurred to me recently that we've spent a lot of time as Americans, and so have other people all over the world, trying to figure out, can we visit Europe? Can we visit Asia? Can we visit South America? What are the rules? Do we have to have a test before we go? Do we have to test after we? Endless, as you know, and the rules keep changing and changing and changing. And I'm sure people in those parts of the world, here where I am in Europe and Asia, and wondering when they get in the United States, what the rules are, even Canada. But I haven't heard a word about Cuba. And Cuba's pretty close to us, 90 miles away from the Florida border. And it's warm, by the way, because it's winter. So Cuba might be a place you might want to visit. But also, Cuba has had a lot of rule changing. So I thought we'd bring an experienced Cuban hand on the show. He's about to join me. His name is Johnny Considine, and he runs a company called Cuba Private Travel out of Cuba, as well as anybody also lives in the UK part of the time. Johnny, welcome to the show. Nice to have you. You're in Cuba today now, right?
Yes, I am. I'm calling you from Havana. Nice to be with you, Rudy.
Nice to be with you. I hope your internet is at least as good as mine. You did tell me that the internet there in Cuba is quite good.
It's absolutely, I would say, on a par with outside of Cuba now. It's very much based on data on your phone, and people are watching movies, people are streaming, people are Zooming. So I think there's been an incredible improvement, as you can probably see from the quality of the picture, etc. And we, just as a by the way, we give people who visit with us a Cuban cell phone to hotspot off of. So you can be online all the time, even in the middle of the countryside in Cuba, up a mountain or wherever. So yeah, big improvement.
It's a surprise to me, and I think it would be a surprise to a lot of Americans that the internet service is good in Cuba. You know, I see all the old cars, old American cars, famous pictures, the cars driving on the street, and you think of Cuba as being, 20 or 30 years behind the times, but I'm glad, at least in terms of internet, it apparently isn't. Johnny, tell me how you got interested in Cuba. How did you start the idea of bringing folks there, and from the very beginning?
Well, I'd been working in Cuba for about 10 years, and after about sort of the Obama opening up, we began to see that there was a real opportunity to be able to show Americans a legal way to travel to Cuba. That was still a brilliant way to have a good time. So that's where the name Cuba Private Travel came from. As you know, Americans have to stick to certain rules when they travel to Cuba. The main one of which is they need to support private business in Cuba. And our company, Cuba Private Travel, puts together, I think it's now over 550 different experiences in Cuba that are completely private, very local, supporting Cuban people. And I think we have a stock of over 300 or 400 private accommodations, ranging from villas to boutique bed and breakfasts, and even one small luxury hotel of the world, which is a private accommodation. So all of those things together, they fit to be able to offer Americans a way to support Cuban people and travel to Cuba privately.
Now, are these rules promulgated by the Cuban government or by the American government or by agreement between the two governments?
Well, there's very little agreement in that area. These are the rules that the American Treasury Department have put together to allow people to travel to Cuba. I think there are 12 categories. It can be things like for religious purposes or visiting a family. But the main one that people who are interested in traveling to Cuba, who don't have family there or an academic or journalistic reason to visit, would be to support Cuban people and to support private business in Cuba. And that's really what it's all about. It's a win-win for everybody.
When did you start your tour company, Cuba Private Travel?
I started 5 years ago. So really was catching the coattails of the Obama opening up. Obviously, there have been different rule changes since then, but we keep up to date with everything and make sure that we're able to supply people with the right information about how to do it legally and still have an amazing time.
So right now, Americans can visit Cuba.
They can go to Cuba, yeah, absolutely, and
What are
lots
the
are. There
COVID,
are, I think there's over 80 flights a week from the United States to Cuba.
and what
Uh,
are the COVID rules?
the
What are
COVID
the
rules
COVID
are
rules?
also at the moment very relaxed. So if you're vaccinated, you don't have to undergo any testing of any kind. You don't have to go undergo any quarantine. So you arrive at the airport with your paperwork, with your COVID vaccine certificate, your health insurance certificate, and you are good to go. Basically, they check it and they take a temperature check, and then you're off. If if you have family traveling with you, we'll say kids under the age of 12, they don't have to be vaccinated and they don't have to undergo testing or quarantine either. So it's very easy for families to visit. And obviously, the only thing is you need to have your insurance so that if anything happens when you're here, you're fully covered to be repatriated or treated here if that's what you want as well.
And do you have a sense of how the population of Cuba is doing vaccination-wise?
It's one of the highest in the world. I think if you the John Hopkins report last week had us at ours is a triple vaccination, so it's two vaccinations plus a booster. So they already had a head start with the booster. They were giving it to people in any case. So I think it's almost 90% now of the people who've been vaccinated, and I think it's something like 75% who've been triple vaccinated and boosted. So I think we're probably one of the best in the world. It's one of the
That's
advantages of having their own vaccine. The
that's
second vaccine is actually an immune booster as well. So that's very good news.
certainly much more than a higher percentage rate than the United States by far. Tell me what on the street.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, are masks worn in stores and at restaurants?
Yes. I mean, when you go into a restaurant, you're expected to have your mask on. And there is social distancing. You can take your mask off, obviously, to eat and drink, etc. And on the street, you're encouraged to wear
You're encouraged
your
to wear it.
transport. You wouldn't necessarily have to do so. It's kind of there are the rules are in place. They're not heavy as such, but they're just kind
Common sense,
of unnecessarily exposing people.
right? Yeah, there's an occasional little blip in what you're saying, so I sort of filled in for you. I think you were about to say common sense. Maybe I missed.
Yes,
Oh, there
exactly
was a
right.
C.
Exactly right.
So,
Yeah.
your tours, are these guided tours for groups? Are these guided tours? Do you just arrange accommodations and for folks? Tell me about what kind of tours you offer and who your audience is.
Well, our audience are predominantly, I would say, people who are interested in experiential travel. So it's not the people who are interested in going to the beach and spending 10 days sitting on a sun lounger. They're very much people who want to get under the skin of the culture of Cuba, whether it's from the point of view of kind of, we'll say, the pillars of Cuban culture, which would be music, dance, rum, cigars, but also a lot of nature and adventure. Cuba kind of isn't on the radar of people who want to go swimming, go diving, uh, go bird watching, go horse riding, climbing. So there's a lot of soft adventure, but the main thing is making connections with local Cuban people. So what we try to do is to find out what our clients are interested in, whether it's teenagers who are interested in an e-bike ride or learning to kite surf or climb, or if it's an adult who they're interested in dance and music and art. And then we put them in contact with similar Cuban people who are passionate about those particular things. So it could be a jazz musician, a private performance with a jazz musician, or it could be a cigar aficionado or a rum maestro. Which
That,
is what I think. And
that's
everything, accommodation, uh, a great guide, transport. It can be in vintage cars or it can be in more modern cars, depending on the distances they want to travel. and then we just put together a really nice menu for them to choose what they want to do when they're here.
That is terrific. That is really terrific. So, do you normally take? Well, let me first of all, you're talking about immersing yourself in Cuban society and being able to travel around. Is the country your oyster, or I seem to remember years ago, and it's probably obsolete information, but one of the big beach resorts was it Veradero? Is that the city?
Yes, in Varadero. That is the biggest beach resort.
And
And
Americans were not supposed to go there or something. Wasn't there some deal because it's a
well,
beach?
you're not meant to come to Cuba as a tourist. I mean, the main thing that Americans are meant to do is to support private businesses, or if they're coming here on humanitarian work. But of course, there are many different ways that you can support private businesses in Cuba. So, for example, Varadero has many private houses. And it also has many private people opening new businesses. And it could be something like learning to dive or snorkel or kayak or kite surf. So, the main thing that for the category of support the Cuban people is that you should be supporting private business, not staying in a government hotel. And as long as
So,
you do that, then you're meeting the requirements of that license. And also, you're obviously helping local Cuban families enormously at the same time. So, yeah.
so Veradero is open to Americans. I mean,
It
if
is open to
that's
Americans. I mean, I would say you kind of have to stay on the right side of a fine line of what tourism is and what it isn't. One is not meant to engage in tourism. So the idea that you could come and just lie on the beach, that's not what that license wants you to do. What they want you
got
to do is to be able to demonstrate that you have spent the majority of your time actively supporting Cuban businesses, and obviously lying on the beach is not going to really do that. But things like if you are supporting a young man who set up a business teaching kite surfing, then you are definitely helping. You're definitely supporting private business in Cuba. So it's very much about getting the right advice from a company like ours and making sure that you're doing the right thing when you're here.
Is there a way you can give us a feel for the price of visiting Cuba? I mean, it's going to cost me $100 a day to have a guide and lodging and food, $200 a day, 300. I'm sure there are different levels of luxury. As you said, you have a member of the luxury hotels of the world, or small luxury hotel, whatever it's called, the association. That hotel is obviously a lot more expensive than staying in
Yes.
a B&B sort of arrangement. But what kind of money are we talking about
There's a
here to
full,
visit
there's,
Cuba?
yeah, there's a full range. I mean, we kind of filter through and we just find what's good in each kind of price bracket. So, for example, we could start off with a room in a house with a Cuban family that would cost you about $60 a day for two people staying in a room. And we would make sure that it's one of the best ones, that you're dealing with people who are very hospitable, great communicators, perhaps could speak English, and offer better quality than maybe some of the other ones, because like everywhere there's good and bad and everything. And then you can move up the scale to, I would say, anything from 100 to about $200 a day, and that gets you what we would call a boutique bed and breakfast. And these are places that are more design led. Perhaps the breakfast is a little bit more on the white tablecloth and vintage silver type of thing, but just a kind of a more holiday special experience. And then obviously, as you mentioned yourself, there's the small luxury hotel, which is also a private property, and villas, and you would be looking at anything around from $400 to $600 a night for those. And obviously you're getting the type of service and quality of room that you would expect for that kind of money. So that's the kind of range.
And are guests faring for their own for lunch and dinner generally, or do you generally provide that or steer them in a direction?
We'll do whatever people want. I mean,
Okay.
typically our type of clients, they would like everything to be organized for them. A lot of Americans are not exactly generous. They don't have huge amounts of holiday time, so they really like everything to be organized so they get the best out of it, whether it's a 4-day trip for visiting Havana or a 7-day trip visiting the western part of the island. But typically, what we provide everybody with a concierge, with a Cuban cell phone, and we'll organize and often include all of the restaurants, again, all private restaurants. We normally provide everybody with good transport. So it could be a vintage car or a very good quality SUV and a guide. And then obviously, once you've got all that in place, good accommodation, a good guide, good transport, then you can sit down and you can work out from the 400 or 500 experiences that we offer what you'd like to do during your time when you're in Cuba. So it is different for everybody. Obviously, some people like more art and music and culture. Other people prefer soft adventure, but there literally is something for everybody.
You really do make it sound quite easy and attractive, I will tell you. Johnny Considine is the owner of, I want to get the name because it's rather generic, Cuba Private Travel. And the website is cubaprivatetravel.com, correct, Johnny?
That's correct,
He
yeah.
started the company 5 years ago. We're talking obviously about traveling to Cuba, which I haven't heard much talk about during COVID. The COVID months we've been toughing through, and Johnny is making it sound, not making it sound, is from what Johnny's telling us, it sounds quite easy now to go to Cuba for Americans, as long as you abide by certain rules that the American government promulgated. How's the food, by the way, in Cuba, Johnny?
The food in Cuba, I would say, is excellent. I mean, we don't have the huge variety that you have in Europe or America, but what we do have is very good quality food. Remember that a lot of the food here is organically grown by necessity. I mean, farmers just don't have the money for chemicals and for fertilizers. So the food that they have is very, very good food, you know. So you're talking about seafood, lobster, not so much on the beef front, but lots of what we call viandas, lots of vegetables, rice and beans, of course. So and in Havana we have a lot of different cuisines, you know, from everything from Chinese to Korean to Lebanese to Indian. So the food is very, very good. I think people are often very surprised. And of course, the restaurants that we choose, which are probably on the top end, are really exceptional. So people are often very surprised by that.
What does one? I have two questions, not really related, but they're so one really easy to answer. What would you pay at a very nice restaurant for dinner for two in Havana? That's question number one. Question number two is, what nationalities predominate as tourists in the country?
Well, the first question is, I would say the best restaurant in Havana, you would be very hard pressed to spend more than $100 on supper for two people, and that would include cocktails and fairly reasonable wine, and you know, a three-course meal including lobster. I mean, you'll be talking about everything from lobster carpaccio to a really fresh sea bass. You know, so it's not expensive. You know, that's the first thing. And the people who visit Cuba, I mean, we're still at around 2.5 to 3 million visitors, which is very, very little for an island of our size. You know, we're 1,000 kilometers
Excuse me
from
for
one end.
interrupting. Are those COVID numbers or are those historical numbers?
Well, we were never really that high. So the highest I think we ever got to was about 4 million. And now we're back down to about 2.5, of which I would say 1 million are Canadians going to the beach more often than not. Then you have all the Cuban Americans coming back home, or people coming back, Cubans coming back home to visit their family. That's often about 1 million. And that really leaves about 500,000 for the rest of the world. And if you take out, we'll say, of those, a lot of those are still package tourists. You're left with quite a small number of people who are interested in experiential travel. So it never feels busy in Trinidad, in Viñales, in Old Havana. And I would say if you were thinking of coming, now is one of the best times you could visit, because it's just got such low visitor numbers, which is always a nice time to visit anywhere, you know.
I know you have roots in the UK. Do you have? I imagine you have a lot of American customers, clients, obviously, probably Canadian. Do you have any Europeans, UK folks?
A lot of UK. UK is a very big market for Cuba, very popular. Also Germany, France, Spain, Russians, Eastern Europeans who are coming back to Cuba, and also people from the Near and Far East. So, you know, it's quite a broad range. I think Cuba is on everybody's bucket list, not always at the top, but it's kind of on everybody's list. So
I
yeah,
would
a good broad range of clients.
I would agree that's on everybody's bucket list, including mine. Mr. Travel Journalist here, has never been to Cuba. I'm ashamed to say it, and I hope to get there.
Oh my God.
And I'll deal with you when I do, Johnny. Trust me.
I hope
Uh,
so.
but but I introduced you by saying, at least in the States, I don't hear anything about Cuba lately. You know, can I go? Can I go? The COVID rules, laws. Um, do is that just because my head isn't into Cuba like yours is? But I've been surprised. I mean, when I remembered that you had joined me for a radio show a few years ago, I thought, yeah, Cuba.
Mhm.
Nobody's mentioned Cuba. Is that just me because I haven't
I
heard
think
it?
people are confused. You know, people are confused in the United States about whether they can and cannot visit. So there's always that kind of hazy um, information stream where people, you know, they just don't know if they can. The other thing is that we've just opened really on November the 15th after a year and a half. So it's
Ah,
taken a couple of weeks for things to get back up and running. And I think that the full flight number of flights from America only came on stream last week, which is about 80 flights a week from New
and
York,
who's
from Atlanta, from Miami area. So it's really only just sort of come back on to eyeline. But we're definitely seeing a lot of demand from the United States, and people are beginning to think, okay, that's a safe destination. Not many people are visiting. There's lots of availability. Let's give it a go. So I think you're right. It hasn't been front of mind, but I think it's becoming that way.
what U.S. airlines are serving Cuba? Do you know?
JetBlue, American Airlines, Delta, Southwest, United. So we have very people are often surprised. We have a very strong connection to the east coast of America, and then obviously once you connect through Fort Lauderdale or Miami or New York, then you can really connect across the country. So
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
plenty of.
glad to hear the majors are back in business there. If you were planning a trip and had never been to Cuba, as I have not been, how many days would you recommend one stay for to have a meaningful trip?
I would say 7 days, Rudy, is a brilliant amount of time if you can manage it. I mean, you can come and visit Havana for 2 nights, as people often do, and people have done since the 1950s. I mean, it's always been a brilliant destination from a weekend getaway from New York, which is basically the same as coming to Florida. But I would say 7 days is fantastic because you can really pack it in. You know, you can go to visit Havana, where you have all the nightlife, the culture, the music, the dance, the cigars, the rum, the cocktails, great restaurants, and a lot of experience from e-bikes to art to photography. There's absolutely tons to do. But then you can also go to the other two UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So you have Vinales, which is the tobacco growing area. So you can get out into the countryside and you can see how the local Cuban people live in the countryside, growing tobacco, very old traditional ways of agriculture still. And also a lot of soft adventure. I mean, people don't realize in Vinales Valley, you can horse ride, you can trek, you can climb, you can mountain bike. And then you go south to Trinidad, which is our third UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's one of the oldest colonial towns in the Americas. And you can see incredible architecture. Again, great nightlife. You have the Escambray Mountains, you have the coastline on the south, which is great for diving and snorkeling. And you have what we call the Galapagos of Cuba, which is the Jardines de la Reina, which is a great place for Americans to visit because it fits into the humanitarian license, because it's a huge conservation area. So you can come and dive there completely legally because you are supporting conservation work in the Caribbean. We're one of the few areas in the Caribbean where the coral is growing, where fish numbers are going up. And again, that's directly related to the fact that we don't have fertilizers on the land. So those are the kinds of things you can do. So you, as a multi-generational family visit or for yourself, you can really tick off a lot of land, sea adventures, as well as all the culture that we just mentioned.
And how does one drive in cars or take a van, or how does one get to those destinations, or do you fly? And before you get to that, how far are these 2 hours away, 5 hours away from Havana?
Well, to go to Vinales is 2 hours away. And then you head south, you can head to Bay of Pigs. That's 2 hours from Vinales. And then it's another hour to Trinidad and Cienfuegos. So the distances are not huge. And what we try and do is make sure that we organize it in such a way that they don't seem like they're overbearing and overwhelming people on their trip, but they still get to be able to see as much as possible on the island.
You really, it should go without saying, because I read so many articles on it, but let's hear you say it, or tell me if it's still true that Cubans are happy to see Americans on the island.
Oh, I think so. I think of all the nationalities that come here, there's a huge connection between Americans and Cubans. Americans, first of all, are brilliant visitors. I mean, they are so enthusiastic. I think it's because of the kind of perception that it's not allowed, or it hasn't been allowed. So they're very grateful to be able to come and visit, and also to dispel, some of the preconceptions and find out for themselves what it actually is like here in the country. So, and of course, a lot of Cubans have family living all across America. So they know the country very well. Some have traveled over to the States and stuff. So they have a very similar mentality. I would say they have a much deeper connection than the Cubans and the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans love it here as well, but I think that Cubans view Americans as their best visitors. That's for sure.
Well, I really appreciate your very thorough and knowledgeable briefing, Johnny. It's nice having you aboard today.
Thank you very much. It's great to have the opportunity, and good luck with the rest of your travels.
Thank you. And I want to remind listeners, and for that matter, you, Johnny, that we're doing this on Monday, December 20th, 2021. As I say every time, I know this will live for years on YouTube and Facebook, which is fine, which is great. But keep in mind the information that you heard from Johnny Considine. By the way, I'll repeat the name is Cuba Private Travel, cubaprivatetravel.com. You can find more information about his company and the arrangements he can make for you or your family or your friends visiting. cubaprivatetravel.com. Johnny Considine is my guest. And I just want viewers who are watching this at a later date, beyond 2021, to keep in mind that COVID is very much a consideration for travelers right now, as I talk to Johnny. And so consider that. Take all the information in light of the time we're talking. Meanwhile, we'll be back again soon to see you. I am coming from France. I guess I should tell you that I had, because I'm fully vaccinated, I had no trouble coming to France. When you arrive in France, if you haven't watched our last YouTube video, I did a whole report on coming into Paris last week. When you come to France, you must take your CDC vaccination card to a pharmacy. You can do it at the airport. If you come into LaGuardia, there are pharmacies in many of the terminals. You go to a pharmacy in the town you're visiting, and you pay about $35, $40. You don't take another COVID test. You have to have a COVID test one day before you fly, right? And that's a U.S. regulation. So one day before your flight, you have to come up with a negative COVID test. When you land in France, you take that COVID test to a pharmacy, pay $35 or $40, and they will give you basically a Vax Pass. They call it their document sanitaire. And it's a QR code that shows that you've been vaccinated. You must show that at every cafe, restaurant, museum, any place where the public gathers during your visit. Again, this is information as of December 20th, 2021. all that could change in 1 month, 6 months. Certainly, I hope a year. I hope it'll change long before that. Anyway, I'm Rudy Maxa. Thanks for joining. Hey, if you don't get my newsletter, I put it out every couple of weeks. Has no advertising whatsoever. I'm not selling you anything. It's my sort of views on travel. I'll tell you what restaurants I ate in Paris. I'll tell you what the latest travel news is involving hotels and cruise lines and airlines and points and miles and all that stuff. All you have to do is go to maxatours.com/newsletter. Maxa Tours, all one word. maxatours.com/newsletter. Scroll down the bottom page, put your first, last name, and your email. That's it. You won't get any junk email from anybody else. If you're interested in going on one of our tours in 2022, you can also look at maxatours.com and see what's on offer. Until then, lovely having you aboard. I certainly put Cuba higher on my list for visiting in 2022. I thank Johnny for joining me, and I thank you all for joining me. Happy travels.